kind of in the middle there, they mention a brownfield. The state exam may have a question about this. Some of them do, some of them don't. You won't see it on my exam, but I want to make sure that I hit it for you so that way if you see it on the state exam, you're prepared for it. A brownfield is a vacant plot of land, something that has been left alone, that's been isolated. And as a result, some environmental concerns can possibly happen. So, some industrial plants that have been shut down and have been closed for 20 or 30 years. I remember, I don't know, 10, 15 years ago, a friend of mine used to work at the, he was in security at the Ford plant there on, I think it was English Avenue, kind of on the southeast side of town, and that plant's shut down. They don't operate anymore. The concern is, for that brownfield area, is that they used to build vehicles there, or some components of vehicles. So they were using oils and gases and lubricants and things like that that had petroleum in there. And were they left? Did they get into the concrete? Did they seep down into the ground? Maybe they used acids and other things like that. Are those things still in there? Nobody's in there to watch it. The place is vacant. But that doesn't mean that the oil was cleaned up, or that it was put in a barrel and that barrel has a hole in it, so it's now leaking out into the ground, into the concrete and all that. And because nobody's watching it, this stuff is happening, and it happens over 10, 20, 30 years. So there might be some environmental concerns. Other concerns with that too is that we have this vacant property and vandalism starts to happen. And people start to throw tires out in the lot, and couches, and motor oil, and old batteries, and all this other stuff, because nobody's watching. I've got some motor oil. I changed the oil in my car a couple times, and I've got 2 or 3 gallons of oil. I could take it to a auto shop and have it properly disposed of, or shoot, Ford's just down the street there. Stop by about midnight when nobody's seeing, throw it over the fence, splat. And so there's that concern of those things. So that's what a brownfield is. It's just that it's not that brownfields are all bad. It's just the propensity for it, due to the fact that it's a shut down plant. It's a shut down piece of land that's not being used anymore, not being monitored, not being watched. And are there things happening on it that we just don't know about? Trash and all that kind of stuff. So that's what a brownfield is. At the bottom at 344, we mentioned the Comprehensive Environmental Response Compensation and Liability Act. Wow. It's a mouthful. It's more easily known as what's called the CERCLA Act, which you'll see there in parentheses. The CERCLA Act. And then also in that, you'll see on 345 toward the top, the Superfund Amendments and Reauthorization Act, also known as SARA. So CERCLA and SARA are tied together. You might see this on the state exam too. What this is, what these both kind of encompass. The CERCLA Act says that there are some sites that have environmental concerns. And maybe we have a scenario. Let me take you through a scenario. A seller of a property sells a property to a buyer. Buyer buys this property, moves in, and we find this environmental concern. The buyer did not cause the environmental issue. The buyer just bought it. The previous owner did. The previous owner was doing the environmental damage, not cleaning up, not taking care of it. That seller's gone now. The buyer's moved in. They are the owner of the property. The CERCLA Act says that that buyer has to clean it up. Even though the buyer didn't cause it, because the buyer bought the property, they should have known, they should have done their investigation, whatever. They didn't. Regardless of who caused it, CERCLA would say, we're going after the owner of the property, this buyer, that they're going to clean it up. They're responsible for it. SARA Act, though, was added to this to say that we will hold some of those buyers harmless. if they didn't actually cause this, if they were not the reason for it to happen, the EPA will pay to clean it up. Because what was happening prior to SARA, when CERCLA was in place and the buyer was responsible, the buyer said, screw that. I'm not paying for it. I didn't cause it. I just bought the place. I'm not doing that thing. It was the previous owner. Sue me. Come after me. I'm going to sue the seller. It got wrapped up in all this litigation, had attorneys all involved, took 4, 5, 6, 7 years to process. Meantime, that environmental issue is going on. Nobody's cleaning it up, and it's only getting worse. And the EPA said, we can fight over all this and everything like that, and we'll ultimately figure out who did it, but if we're waiting 6, 7 years and all this has gotten worse, that causes other problems. So that's why they added the SARA Act to say that if we have a situation where the buyer was truly or not the cause of this, the EPA will pay for it. We're going to clean this thing up. We're going to stop it today because we don't want it to get worse. And then once we go through that, then we'll sort out who's paying for it or who's paying us back. So the SARA Act was, they put money into this fund, this super fund, to pay for those environmental cleanups, and then gave some money to, let's go after the person that did this. We're going to go after that previous seller. Going to figure out what happened there and then deal with it after the fact. Let's not fight and bicker and say, you know, finger point, you should have done this, you should have done that, and this environmental thing going on, which is what CERCLA helped to create. SARA said, let's clean it up and then we'll figure it out after the fact. The last thing in the chapter, on page 346, right in the middle, something called the environmental site assessment. Again, you won't see this on my exam, but you might see it on the state exam. Some students have told me they've seen this too. What this is, and where we mostly see this, is on commercial property. We might see it on residential. It's not to say that you can't do this on residential, but it's a lot more common on commercial industrial property. What this is that there is a 3-phase process that we can go through to determine, are there environmental concerns on this property? So usually where we get into this is that we are a buyer of a certain piece of property, and we want to have an environmental site assessment done to figure out, are there problems? It's kind of like a home inspection, but it's for environmental things. So it has environmental experts that are checking this out. We're not necessarily looking at the roof and the water heater. We might be looking at that too if there are environmental concerns, but we're only looking at environmental issues. So it's an inspection, but for environmental stuff. So the 3 phases are this. Phase 1 is what they call just an investigational phase, where the experts go out and they walk the property. They look around. Do we see anything that looks like it might be bad? We're not testing anything. We're not checking anything. We're just looking around. There's some oil dripping over there. That might be a concern. Oh, there's some batteries over there. There might be some lead or acid over there that we're concerned about. So they look around to see, are there any concerns? They also do a little bit of history search. I bought a commercial property a number of years ago. We went through this. Our site didn't have it, but within about 500 feet was an old gas station. The old gas station was shut down, but the concern was that that particular site had an underground storage tank that they stored the fuel in. If that fuel tank had leaked and had gotten into the groundwater, maybe it leaked toward us. So we had that concern there. And so they looked at that history of even neighboring properties. So that's what phase 1 is. We're just looking around, checking stuff out. If that phase 1 turns up some concerns, we saw this, we saw that, we don't know what it is, there's some concern, we enter into phase 2, which phase 2 is where we test. When I say we, again, the environmental experts, they get they do soil samples, they get their chemicals, they do their air samples, they do all the things that they do. So they're testing to see, There's some oil over there. Is it causing a problem? No, it's just leaking and we'll clean it up. It's not a big deal. Or we drill down and there's oil like 2 and 3 feet down into the ground. We've got a serious concern here. So that's what phase 2 is the testing of the concerns. If phase 2 turns up that there is a problem, phase 3 is the cleanup, where we checked it all out, here's a concern, we know it's a problem, we need to take care of it. Phase 3 is the cleanup. So it involves, again, whatever it would take to clean that up. Whether it's digging up the dirt and replacing it, stuff like that.